Yeah,
Cool. Cool. I wanted to get your thoughts on a couple of things. So,
sure.
because you've worked in library science, right? Is that what it's called? Like in
Yeah.
yeah. What are there like? Do you think a layman, just a regular person, could learn to, say, scan relevant studies on like PubMed, for example, or scientific articles, just if they want to investigate something themselves? Or is it such a in-depth skill that you'd really need to be, um, uh, like well studied for many years or something?
Well,
Because
I think a layperson usually can if you teach them some fundamentals about a certain subject. The only thing lacking is the other integration of other subjects, but I do think you could teach the skills to like quickly look through different sources. I mean, I think I've done that before, but I mean, I wouldn't even call that like a layperson. Like, if you're interested in it, at least for searching for information, that's a bit more focused. And yeah, I think anybody could be that. It wouldn't
yeah,
take
okay,
that much time. Usually, it's just knowing what resources there are. That's
yeah.
the main thing about it.
Yeah. And knowing probably how it works, like in terms of, I don't know, there's all these journals and you don't know what they mean. And maybe like
Yeah,
trying to know what organization is this part of and all of that. There's probably skills in that too. Um, yeah, I wonder if
right.
there's demand for that. You could even like sell a course on it or something. I wonder because the reason I'm asking is because like I've been seeing doctors for various things, and so I've noticed that like it's very rare you'll meet someone who's very well like read and up to date. So they're often non-into like they're often not all of them, but there's quite a few that are just they're just it's like that Dostoevsky quote of like I was sent to Paris to see a doctor for the nose because there's no doctor for the noses in Russia. And then I got to Paris and he's, no, I specialize in the right nostril. You need to go to Vienna to go to the doctor who specializes in the left nostril. And there is
Yeah,
some of that today still. And the downside is that you might like a couple of times I've brought up connections to things that a doctor wouldn't know, and then you have to go to someone else and they have read it. So anyway, the reason I'm saying that is there's clearly value in being not like you can't know everything, but just being able to scan through quickly and get a very rough, not perfect, like understanding of everything, but just a rough understanding to see if there's some relevant information for whatever it is you're looking into, which is a skill, right? So
yeah. I know it can be taught, and I've tried to do that to some extent. I haven't really marketed those skills, but I've used them to teach people sometimes.
yeah,
Usually
okay.
within school, like I did a workshop just among other students that on
Cool.
how to search for information efficiently regarding like their research papers and whatnot.
Okay. Maybe we could that might be interesting. Do like a workshop and then, we've got like a shared login to a PC and put that up or something. Do like a mini workshop on that just to see what it's about. That's because
Yeah,
that's,
yeah, I could do that. I mean, teaching you, but then we'll give it for other people to look at too. Like especially like a I guess 1 hour lecture or something on
yeah,
gathering data or gathering
yeah.
information.
I'd be interested specifically in being able to research medical studies and also like financial markets, finance related statistical studies and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
And I mean, there's probably other things as well, but yeah, well, I don't know. It's definitely, I can see that's a valuable skill because I spent yesterday searching quite a bit and it took me a while, like, to figure out, meta-analysis, okay. So overall thing, and then like trying to find the relevant data, knowing how to go through the study efficiently, like that kind of stuff is,
yeah,
um, yeah. Anyway, it's pretty interesting. Okay. So maybe we can add that to the agenda, for
yeah.
later. All right, next thing is rabbit holes. Have you ever had a conversation with someone and they'll say to you, like, you're like, they have knowledge about a field and you ask them something and they'll be like, oh, yeah, you could look at that, but you don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Like, um, it's a rabbit hole. Have you heard that kind of? term used?
Yeah, I think usually I've only heard it really used in like lectures at school and whatnot, where like it really goes off topic what you're trying to teach that day.
Yeah,
That's usually where I hear it mentioned,
yeah.
which makes sense in that context to say that, like, you know, there's a lot of depth to it, but you have to put it aside. But I do think sometimes people might use it to avoid thinking too deeply about something. I think that might happen on occasion too.
I think you're right in both instances because I was reflecting on it, and this is why I wanted to bring it up. Like, because I had a conversation with someone in the industry, and he said it, and I think I was thinking like, well, it's true that, um, like if you're having a conversation and there's a certain context, you can go too far outside of that, but you need to when you're having a conversation or if you're learning something new, it needs to be done hierarchically. Actually, in the OPAR, it was covered, it was talking about like, when you approach philosophy, you can't just ask random questions from every direction. Like, well, how do you know this is true? Who's Ayn Rand to say this is true anyway? What about this? What about ethics? Well, who says that's right? And like, you can just go the questions just go in infinite directions infinitely, basically, right? And so for that reason, I mean, those could be rabbit holes. Like, if you're in a conversation and you go in epistemology, in a sense, it's a rabbit hole. But um, but sometimes it's not too. Like sometimes maybe there is an issue with something that's underlying what's being taught, and you do need to go down that hole, and people experience it as it's not even to avoid deep thinking, because I'm reflecting on my own experience. Sometimes I think it might be being stuck, and so the thinking is inefficient. And so
Mhm.
everything is seen as a rabbit, like a lot of things become a rabbit hole because you 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 just get stuck there. You're not able to take that knowledge and do anything with it. Um, what do
Yeah,
you think of
I
that?
was okay. That's relates a lot to what I was going to tell you about for some reading I did in Visions of Ayn Rand about efficient thinking. It's literally a chapter on efficient thinking. So this chapter was by Barbara Brandon,
Mhm.
and that was the one about the schizophrenic. Remember, where
Right.
the letter made no sense, and it was actually an actual schizophrenic person that wrote that, and that was an example of inefficient thinking. No fundamentals, no efficiency, no goal in mind. Even really, the idea behind it was that setting a goal really determines how your efficient thinking is like the first consideration. Like what are you trying to solve or figure out? You have to set the goal in mind in the first place to
Right.
control what you're talking about, to even set the context for your subconscious to provide you with information that could be relevant to the thing you're talking about. That's one way to consider efficiency in thinking. To did you set a goal? Is Barbara Brandon was using the example of a driver that you could either be the one driving the car, controlling your consciousness, driving it, or you could be a backseat driver, just like you're not in control, you're just kind of throwing things out there. As a backseat driver, you're more an annoyance or a distraction, if anything, because you're not the one choosing the destination per se. You're not the one controlling the car to get to a point. And if you don't really set a destination, it's like you're the backseat driver. You're just wandering, and your thoughts would go in a wandering or meandering way with no particular logical connection.
Yeah.
Be more associated with things like that, or whatever strikes you. Setting a goal is what determines the course of your thinking and even information your subconscious provides, and all those that sort of thing.
Right. And even actually, a question for you: would you make a distinction between being efficient in thinking and effective in thinking?
No, I'll use them interchangeably.
Okay, cool. Um, what was I going to say? That yeah, I mean, I guess that's just volition, and I'd add in um, it's a nice representation of volition with specific examples like a letter that you might write. But um, I'd add in this is what I'm interested in is that part that Lee Pearson talked about where when you get stuck, like there's a certain process you can take. So it's almost like there's setting the context and the goal, and then there's some kind of method of moving towards that, which I don't quite know, but I say that because you can often go to something and then you do feel stuck. Your brain's like jammed, whether that's a contradiction or you just are missing knowledge. What do you think of that? Do you think when you get stuck, it's either of those two? There's some kind of underlying contradiction, not necessarily surface level, like the concepts you're using now, but you might use detached concepts, so like frozen concepts, or you just don't have the knowledge. And so those are the two possibilities that would cause you to be stuck or feel that sensation of like, I'm just not getting anywhere. My subconscious isn't giving me an answer. I don't know what to do.
I think there's more options than that. I think could be one of those and probably other ones too. I don't think it would be limited to those. I think contradiction could be one thing where there isn't any information to go with, that there is no next step in logical progression that can make you feel stuck. Or it can relate to what goal you set, because if you're just going for any random association, if you're making a certain type of drawing, then you're probably not going to get stuck because literally anything goes.
Say that again, sorry, if you were just making.
Like a painting of just random slashes and lines without
Okay.
really thinking about it. You wouldn't really have a goal and you're just kind of doing it randomly, and you wouldn't get stuck because there's no barrier in progression and thinking,
There's
because
no
it's
what
literally
in
whatever.
progression?
There's no logical progression to that. So
Oh,
you can't
okay.
really get stuck. There's nowhere to get stuck at because there's no goal in mind. Because every
Well,
direction is just as good as another.
um,
So it
yeah,
depends on your goal. I mean, like if your goal is to write the next great magnum opus in Western literature, I could see somebody getting stuck because they don't do the logical progression how to get there. Not to mention, it's probably an impossible goal because you can't just say, I'm going to be the best writer there ever was in Western literature, and you'll get stuck because maybe you don't know the logical progression to have that kind of greatness immediately, which would be impractical. In a way, that'd be like a contradiction in a way. But in another sense, it could be achievable. But if you just set a goal like that, you'll feel stuck because how do you get there? That's a huge amount of information. Integration, how do you become the greatest writer? Well, you
mm,
need sub goals and sub steps and all that stuff. And then you could make it like you can unstuck yourself, because then you give yourself a progression that you can go through that is possible to do. It's not like you're just willing it out of nothing. You're giving yourself a progression. And if you don't have the right progression, whether it's due to lack of knowledge, that you don't know how to get to the next step because you need more information, could be you're evading something. That's another possibility. But I think ultimately that comes down to how do you follow to your goal? How do you follow through to your goal? Like, is there a path or is there not?
so from what I got, there's three possibilities. Oh no, there's a few. So one is you said you get stuck because you've set the wrong goal. Another
Yeah,
one is you get stuck because of a contradiction. Another one is not enough knowledge. Another one would be, I mean, this is not exhaustive. I'm just
yeah,
recalling. And then another one would be you said evasion, which is,
yeah. Like
yeah,
you
okay,
could ignore that, say your family life is not working right now, or you have a toxic relationship at home. Like you
right,
could evade that in a certain goal of like, oh, what do you want to do in your career? Well, you probably can't ignore those things.
yeah,
And if you did ignore it, you might feel stuck and go, how can I get out of this? But in a way, you admit what's going wrong and
yeah.
deal with it directly. And then you could figure out the steps to resolve it.
And the method with getting stuck, would it not include then a process of thinking about like readjusting goals and like, by setting sub goals? Because
Yes.
yeah, anyway, yeah. But I don't know what method would that be because I was thinking about it because yesterday I realized like, I got stuck on two problems and they were dumb. I don't know if it was lack of information or contradictory like premises in some things that I use, but I don't want to share because they're personal things that I was working on. But
Yeah.
like You know, I realized like, wow, I spent the whole day and my mind was like jammed in some way because I was just doing so much random action just because I didn't know what to do. And then I was thinking, so what would be, yeah, like what would be the method to get unstuck? Like the Pearson talked about it a little bit, but it wasn't clear. Like he just talked about the theoretical aspect that you can get stuck.
Yeah.
But I couldn't quite extrapolate from that anything and like what would actually be the method.
Well, I can break it down a bit of first identifying what the problem to be solved is. I mean, I think that's the number one step. Like, what is it that you're trying to do, or identifying what the thing is you're thinking about first. Like, what is
Yeah,
it that's bothering you? What is it that you need to achieve?
yeah.
Say you want to climb, you want to free climb a mountain.
Mm.
Say you want to say you want to do that. Just identifying there's a thing, like free climb a mountain, then you could think of, or what are ways to achieve that? Identifying what are ways to get there. You mean you could train yourself a lot. Or you could just go for it, or
Well, you'd
things
first need
like
to get
that.
the requirements, right? And they're not
Yeah,
always going to be easily available. Meaning, like, let's say you do want to climb a mountain, you can Google how to climb mountain, but that may
yeah,
not be the information that's relevant to you, and you may never find it Googling.
yeah. That's true. I mean, I just as far as identifying goals, I mean that's what I'm trying to get at here. Like you can identify different things
Yeah,
you could do or attain, and just as a matter of setting your goal. I mean, you could look at them before setting them. Like, what are possible goals with this scenario? Like, you could say, like, I want to climb the mountain, or you just want to be on top of the mountain, or you want to just explore the mountain, or like whatever things you want to consider about the mountain. You can decide, oh, I want to climb it, maybe. You could
yeah.
identify that kind of thing.
I mean, I guess the I'm just reflecting on um yeah, maybe it was lack of knowledge because I was asking like, does it make sense for me to try and schedule this appointment now, or does it make sense for me to just wait until this guy has a time available? And then you like, there's like a rabbit hole of all this knowledge. It's not clear. Like I don't think I had a clear, um, I didn't automatically have knowledge to that answer, and I didn't know how about getting that answer. So it sounds like it's probably similar to setting a goal that you don't have the means yet of answering. Like you don't have a means yet of attaining. You need to set some other smaller sub goal. Like, you know, when you talk about an author setting a goal of um, becoming the greatest literary giant of all time, like there's no means for him. He doesn't know even how to, what's the first step? I don't like, you don't know.
Yeah,
So there's like a process of breaking it down. I guess the difficulty is like, you know, you can find like, I think there's a book in maths called Polya's How to Solve It, some Russian guy. And like, I don't know how much that applies, but there's definitely like even a broader, more fundamental question of like every time you ask a question, set a goal, like what is the method by which you logically progress through it, you know?
yeah. I mean, it's hard to think about exactly what goes on to solve these things other than identification is the first thing you do. You identify the problem, you
Yeah.
identify what's out there bothering you, then you could identify these different things. Then by through the identification, you can say, what are the means to resolve that issue or to attain that goal or to attain that end? And
Yeah.
you could reason out. Your subconscious could help provide different immediate associations with what might be a relevant factor to the goal, or you might reason some things out. You might deduce something from like if you want to climb a mountain, you need equipment to do so. So that could be part of your goal. Like, oh, I've identified how to achieve that. Well, first, I mean, to climb mountains, you need equipment because you need to pull yourself up somehow. And so you might say you need a pickaxe or a rope or something like that. And then that'd be one way of looking at the problem. And then you might be stuck saying, well, the mountain is not good for using a pickaxe or something like, oh, I can't use that pickaxe. And you can start thinking, I need to change the context, or need to change my knowledge. Like if it was sandstone versus granite or something, I don't know if it makes a difference, but or if you could even have that in a mountain, but you can get stuck because, oh, I don't know how to deal with granite. So then you get stuck and you need to gather information from other rock climbers, say, about how to finish working out through that goal or that sub goal. Or then you might consider other goals like physical strength you need, and you could deduce from that what you would need to do. And it's just a matter of, I think, breaking down what you first identifying the thing to do, or identifying the relevant information, and then breaking it down into a goal.
I think that's what you said is okay. So it sounds like part of what you said was almost a process of discovery as opposed to one of learning from someone else. Like try this, doesn't work, try that, which is definitely a part of a process of learning sometimes.
Yeah.
But what was I thinking? Oh, I just lost it. What did you just say now at the end?
That I mentioned like strength and needing to even deducing from there that a different sub goal from that strength, and really figuring out the different factors you need to put into attaining that goal. I don't quite remember what I said at the
Yeah,
end
I
of
mean,
that.
I forget what I wanted to ask you. I was gonna say something, ask you something, but never mind.
Yeah, you
Um,
describe it as discovery. Well, I think discovery is part of it. Learning from others is part of it. It's just whatever it might be to gain more information. Getting
ah,
stuck being like you just didn't know how to complete the goal, or you don't know how to complete the logical reasoning or progression.
I just remembered. Okay, because you said you get the relevant information, but when you don't know something about a field, that's the problem. You don't know what
Yes,
is relevant. So,
right. So, I mean, that's the tricky part, I think. How do you know? You could be stuck in that sense, like, well, I don't know what's relevant. And I could see getting stuck then. Like, you don't know, you don't want to take in too much. So then you end up not taking in anything because you just be grading randomly and you wouldn't feel good about doing that. I guess it's a matter of further identification. Like, you could identify the issue and then you could consider what is outside. I guess that's still hard. I think that might be an issue usually where you do have to go to someone. That's a case where I do think outside help is probably the best thing to do,
right.
because it's difficult to, you could figure it out on your own and discover it, but that would involve a lot of mistakes.
It's a trial and error process then, I
Yeah, a
think.
lot of it. And
Yeah,
then just going to other people just helps you do it faster.
yeah, agree.
Yeah, you could do it on your own, but it's more difficult. And obviously, if you're the first one to do it, yeah, that's probably the most difficult thing of all. You're the
Yeah.
first person to ever climb Mount Everest. That's totally different than if you're the second person. Not even close to similar. Then once the first person does it, then really it just starts happening all the time. I think that's literally what did happen with Mount Everest. Like Edmund Hillary, I think that was his name, or whatever his name was. He climbed Mount Everest. He was the first one ever, and who knows how long. And all of man, but now people do it kind of regularly.
Yeah.
But he was the
Right.
first one to know how to do it and really solve the problem. Other
Mhm.
people got stuck, maybe literally that they died, or got stuck in the sense that they couldn't find any way that they could overcome the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I don't think there's like I don't think from what I got, I don't think there's unfortunately one unified method of like in the broad fundamental terms of like applying that I'm aware of that lets you figure everything out from how to climb a mountain to how to you know make decisions to how to maybe I don't know. I don't
I
think there's
think
like
the only real general rule we could have is identification of just identifying the things in question, the entities. You could say identify the mountain, identify, once you identify the mountain, you could think about the nature of mountains or the definition of mountain, and that could assist you. But obviously problems are so varied that you can't just have a one rule, but identity and causality always applies. So you could use the rule of fundamentality is what Barbara Brandon phrased it as,
Right.
which is how you, let me just read this one quote about what makes something fundamental or essential. Um, I have it here somewhere. Fundamental is a primary characteristic, not a secondary consequence. It is a cause, not an effect. So when defining things, you can think of the fundamentals about it, and that could help you differentiate what aspects to take out or what, if you identify the fundamental characteristic, the cause of what makes it what it is, the cause of all that, then you might be able to piece together what then that causes. And you might be able to work out to what extent does that extend to your knowledge. I mean, how far out do we need to consider the details of a mountain? We don't necessarily need to go all the way to chemistry. We don't need to know about atoms and electrons. But it would be difficult to figure out because it's just a matter of finding that fundamental and through the definition or using the definition which has the fundamental.
Yeah, we can get into that when I do epistemology because I don't fully follow that. Like I mentioned to you, I think quite a while ago, like I don't see why there has to be one fundamental, like different parts of a, but let's save that because that's a rabbit hole, right?
Sure.
Which we can save for a different context in epistemology.
Yes.
Do you make any distinction between because I've seen this come up a lot, and it's not really clear. It's like almost like the terms are used interchangeably, but they're not sometimes. So they're making a distinction between a cognitive faculty and reason.
A difference between the two?
Yeah, cognitive seems more scientific, but it doesn't, I don't know if it's adding anything. Because I'll give you quote examples. Many people regard logic not as a cognitive function, which to me is you could substitute for reason, but a social one. They regard it as a means of forcing other men to accept their arbitrary ideas. That's one example. Cognitive relationships of reality, cognitive processes, cognition versus like also as opposed to cognition versus thinking. Like it's not. I've seen that come up, and the terms are constantly switched, and it's not clear. Like, is anything else meant by that?
When I hear cognition, I think mental processes that are volitional or volitional processes and pertaining to volitional processes. Like it could either be like processes that go, I'm trying to think of a good way to explain this. I like to think cognitive as the mental processes that characterize advanced thought, which would be reasoning and conceptual thinking. And I don't think it would contain anything different than reason, the faculty of reason. I would say it's a more precise way a more scientific way of describing the faculty of reason. When they say faculty of reason, it seems more like you're turning a process into a thing. And it's a process, not an object. So it's going to be awkward to say faculty of reason. And usually I like to say cognitive because it emphasizes that it's a process of thinking, a process of these advanced thinking processes, pertaining to concepts and reasoning and things that influence reasoning, these higher level thinking, like language.
So it is basically reason, but just for maybe linguistic reasons, they use cognitive.
Yeah, I can't give a particular reason why they would choose one or the other than the connotation.
Okay, cool. All right, do you want to go to art?
Yeah, I just want to make one interesting observation that remember the encirclist thing
Yeah,
that
yeah.
Peacock, that's actually from a book. Like it's from one is from the lectures I was reading, these Brandon lectures. That he
What do you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, and it was mentioned by Barbara Brandon. It's from a book or it's from a paper called On Specific Laws of Logic and Schizophrenia. And there was a schizophrenic patient who believed there was a connection between Jesus,
Mm,
cigar box, and sex
Sorry, what was it? On specific laws of logic.
in schizophrenia. It was a paper written in the
Oh,
50s
okay.
sometime, I think. And it was
Oh,
a schizophrenic patient who believed that Jesus, cigar box, and sex were related by the idea of being encircled. Like the head of Jesus as a halo, he imagined a cigar is by a band of tax band around it, and a sex as in a man has been encircled by his desire, and he sees them as
oh,
somehow relevant, and
got
he
it.
thought them as like a schizophrenic might see these accidental things as fundamental, but that's kind of what characterizes him as schizophrenic. Any accidental thing could be important with no active particular logic behind it, just the
What
associations.
What's interesting to me though is that it takes someone to have like I assume that he had some genetic or biological issue.
Yeah,
Um, but it takes that in order to misintegrate in that way. Like, but if the integration is volitional, then you'd assume some people might end up doing that without a biological, or do you know what I'm saying?
yeah. I mean, on occasion, probably it's not nearly as bad. I guess you could say that if you're at least a normal functioning brain, that it won't, you probably won't fail to that regard all the
Right.
time.
Right. Mm, okay. Um, yeah, that's interesting. It's from a paper. It was from. I thought he just invented it because he
No.
normally comes up with funny examples. Actually, isn't that kind of like a process you might go through to come up with a metaphor?
What do you mean?
So, like um, you're thinking about sex and you want to create a metaphor for it. So you talk about its encircled nature as like a cigarette in a mouth of Jesus, or you just like there's there's a kind of like when you create a metaphor, it's not obviously you're not there's you're looking at similarities and differences, but you're looking at them in a way that's not causally relevant, you know? Um,
Yeah, it's probably a similar process, but the difference being, of course, recognizing the purpose of you doing that, recognizing that's a metaphor versus recognizing this is a fact of reality. Like that's
yeah,
probably what the
true.
schizophrenic has a hard time understanding. It's not
Yeah,
wrong to do those things. It's wrong to do it without knowing what you're doing.
yeah, I'm just pointing out that like I wouldn't have
Yeah,
thought of making a connection between like I wouldn't have even noticed a connection between Jesus,
right.
cigarettes, and sex. There's no way. But there's like a creativity there too, which is like even though
Right.
he's noticing things that are not relevant to one another as far as like actually operating as a human in the real world, like there is a it's pretty interesting as far as like I doubt he'd be able to then write a book and but that's like if you pick up on all kinds of similarities you might start I don't know maybe you get good at making metaphors for things.
Yeah, I mean, there's some research that being, if you think of schizophrenia as kind of like a spectrum that you could express some characteristics of it without having full-blown schizophrenia, that if you're kind of express some of it, you'll be more creative than other people on average. But if it's so bad that you have full-blown schizophrenia, then you won't think as creatively because it
Right,
starts to become arbitrary.
right, right,
So
got
it's
it.
like a balance between recognizing all these random connections, but also recognize how what's valid, what's valid reasoning, what's merely a creation and invention.
Yeah, I suppose it also depends on what you consider creative. Like right now, we're talking about metaphors, but
Yes.
if you meet someone unusual, like, and they are like that a little bit, then yes, they're creative in the sense of their observation of similarities and differences because it's unusual. It's not common.
Yeah.
But is that, I don't know, it gets into what is creativity and like what would
Yes,
you
it
consider
does.
it's just something unusual, but it is interesting.
Yes.
Uh, cool. Thanks for sharing that. That came from a paper. This is the art. Do you want to go into the art, or is there something else that you wanted to chat
Um,
about?
that was it. That was the main thing. As far as anything else I had to mention from the book was actually just another way of stating things I've already said, but I'll save that for another time.
Actually, I
About
want to ask you. I want to ask you something. We're
sure.
talking about rabbit holes at the start of the conversation,
Right.
and like how, yeah, sometimes you don't want to go in a rabbit hole, but there's also sometimes people who don't. It's not that they don't. Well, maybe you could say they don't want to think, but it's because they've experienced, like myself, you can experience thinking as like, I guess the way people say it is overthink, but really to me that just means
Yeah.
not not effective thinking. Like it doesn't. It's you're not accomplishing any goals, so you just blame. You say thinking doesn't get you anywhere at some point. Um, so with this rabbit hole thing, like, would you say though sometimes it's necessary to go into rabbit holes because it's curiosity that leads you to discover new things. Like, for example, take a practitioner in a field and you're trying to learn from him, and he's stuck very much within his um, approach. And so everything you want to do is being considered going into a rabbit hole and like not the way to say earn money or not the way to actually do well at your job. But wouldn't it be the case that to go in a rabbit hole is like curiosity is what leads to new discovery. So if you want to go beyond where he's at, then you do need to go into the rabbit holes.
Yeah, I would phrase it more like it's dangerous is a way. If you know what you're doing, it can be really valuable. If you don't know what you're doing, you could end up worse off than before.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's how I would like to think of it.
How
That
so?
once,
Yeah, go on.
like, it's important to know the principles of reasoning and setting context and setting goals and all that, as you got to know that beforehand before you go into the more complex skills like going into rabbit holes effectively. Like, it's hard to do that
Yeah,
without getting lost and just rambling. To
right.
know what you're doing is more difficult. And I think you can only do that once you know the principles of reasoning or some of the important principles. And then you can work through these difficult situations. Like, it's like an advanced course in it. Like you can do it well, but it you can't just be new at it. You got to be experienced. Like, you can't just immediately pop yourself into a professional soccer game and think you'll
Yeah,
do great. You just have to, I forget where that metaphor was going. You can't just pop yourself in there if you just started practicing yesterday.
yeah.
You can't just end up there all of a sudden. So like
Mm.
it's like any skill. Like, reasoning is a skill that you build up, that you practice with, and once you've got the skill, you can engage in the more difficult things.
Yeah, makes sense.
Maybe another comparison would be like, I got this idea from the Visions of Ayn Rand book as well, that it's not wrong to just take it easy at the end of the day and not really do much and just kind of sit around. As long as you understand it's in the context of you're giving your mind a break, a temporary break. It's not, you're not doing it by practice, you're not doing it as a habit, you're doing it with a specific goal in mind. You know what you're doing, you know why you're doing it, and it's not random. If you're taking a break just because you felt like it with no goal in mind, it just because it struck you as fun to do. And so you took a break, that's more dangerous. You're not really setting goals. You're not setting a purpose to your thinking. You're not even doing any, even your breaks don't have purpose. Like, anything you
Right.
do should have some purpose behind it.
Well, it's
Even
not a
taking a break.
break. A break from what?
Yeah, yeah, just a break from work is fine. Like you could just empty your mind, just watch some TV mindlessly for like an hour. There's nothing wrong with that because if you know what you're doing,
Yep. And how does that relate to rabbit holes?
in the sense that if you're curious about something and by discussing a topic, you suddenly realize this other path. You can go on a discussion. You could realize where you're going. Like you want to change the context. Something else is more interesting right now, or things like that. You realize that you'd rather spend your time on this other path of thinking, or you think it might lead to somewhere interesting that you could circle back to the original topic. Like you have a plan in mind of what you're doing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't, but it perfectly ties into that quote from Opar at the start. Do you remember the one I'm talking about where he's like, maybe I'll find it. Uh, who is, let me see if I can, yeah, this quote, I'll paste it to you. Search the web, and then we can, there we go. I've reached my limit of copy pasting from that book, so I've got to search the web for each quote I want to copy paste.
It's a lot of copy paste.
I've done so much, it's ridiculous. Yeah, so it's this thing. Suppose, for example, that you read an article from Ayn Rand and glean from it only one general idea with which you decide you agree. Man should be selfish. How, you must soon ask, is this generality to be applied to concrete situations? What is selfishness? Does it mean doing whatever you feel like doing? What if your feelings are irrational? But who is to say what's rational or irrational? And who is Ayn Rand to say what a man should do anyway? Maybe what's true for her isn't true for you, or what's true in theory isn't true. It's such a
Yeah,
classic peak off example. I love it. But I think that's it definitely captures that when I started. Remember that was what I was doing. I was just
yeah,
asking. Um,
yeah,
but then it's almost like you can't unless you already have knowledge of the field. You don't know how to. There's no there's no structure to approach it. Like you're pointing out, if you don't know, if you're not already like say you've not mastered reason, then you can't. It's very hard to get into some other rabbit hole.
yeah. In a way, learning is like creating the structure. At the start, you have no structure, so it can make sense why you're kind of like grasping everywhere, asking random questions.
Yeah.
That as you create the structure, then your questions start to be more organized and set up
Right.
and more prepared.
Right. So I guess in any field, like yeah, this is not even specific to philosophy, but in any field you're approaching, you really need to uh, identify the fundamentals first. We're coming back to that issue, the fundamentals,
Yeah.
and the best way to do that, if the field is already developed, is a teacher, not Google, because sometimes
Mhm.
Google can substitute, but a teacher,
Yeah.
and then go from there to explore the rabbit holes.
Yep. Yeah, we probably should do a few art questions, I think, now.
Let's
Let's
do it.
see.
Yeah. Okay. Some of this you're gonna to skip because it's not. This is relevant to one of an earlier questions I
Yeah.
asked ages ago, and I don't want to get into it too much. But the only aspect of this that I'm curious about now. So this is specifically about altruism, which this I'm not interested in yet because it's psychology. It's too out of context. Um, I didn't get why would his values be consigned to subjectivity? Like, if someone is um, ignoring the needs of his soul, why are his values subjective?
Um,
That bit I was like, I didn't quite get that connection. This
there's,
bit to consign to his deepest
yeah,
values to the impotent underground of his. Is it because he's
yeah.
repressing
Here,
consciously his needs?
I'm reading it again. I think it's referring to the desire to ignore his willingness to live with the unknown and evade. I think is referring to that specifically.
Right, because if you're not consciously thinking through your own needs, then you still have your own needs if you're to survive. So they're gonna, by nature, be subjective because your subconscious is just gonna come up with answers. Is that sort of what it's getting at?
Yes. Yeah, because there's no guidance behind it, no
Yeah,
goal set by your rational mind. It's just whatever happens.
got it.
It's right sometimes, it's wrong sometimes,
That
but
makes
there's no
sense.
way to know.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, cool. That one was not 100% relevant to art, but I was just curious. So
Yeah.
this one is. Um, I'm just trying to reconcile it with my own experience. So this is not a, I don't know if there's an answer to this, but it's more what's your experience and how, other people's experiences that you've.
I mean, it's just saying art's an end in itself. You just do it for itself, like really the experience of it.
I'll
Um,
highlight to you what I was curious about though. So art is an end in itself, serves no pleasure other than contemplation. The contemplation is so intense, so it's self-just resists. Okay, this bit often resists any suggestion to analyze it. Really? I haven't had that.
yeah, I don't agree with her. I don't really know why she phrases it that way.
The suggestion has the quality of an attack on his identity, the deepest self. That's cool, but I've never had that experience.
Neither have I.
Yeah. Maybe it's an artist's experience.
I don't know. I think it's just unique to her. I
Yeah.
mean, I agree that's an end in itself. That's really what art is, or it
I
ought
don't
to
agree
be.
with that, so we can explore that later. So,
Yeah, but I think the only real takeaway point you should have is just that Rand's position is that art is an end in itself. It's no practical end, but only some spiritual purpose, I guess, is the only function she's talking about. It's not going to help you drink, live, or like grow better or something like that, but psychologically it matters.
okay, well, we can get to that because that's the other thing I'm
Yeah.
curious about. So, I mean, it says it's an end in itself, it's a self sufficient primary. And then we get to this part I'm looking at now. No human emotion can be causeless, blah, blah, blah. Art does have a purpose and does serve a human need, but a need of man's consciousness. But the spiritual is the practical in this philosophy. So how is that not a, to me, it's like, it
Yeah,
does have a purpose then. Like, I don't quite get to me, that is
that's
a
a purpose.
purpose. And it's not, it's not just like a pure
Yeah,
magical, maybe
yeah,
I've
I
not.
don't like her phrasing because clearly she's mentioning some antecedent cause to the, or antecedent end. Well, kind of antecedent end, but I mean, the end is after the, but there's still antecedent causes too. Maybe that is actually the answer. Like antecedent would as we before, but this that would be after. Um,
Yeah, look at this. Uh, So it is, I would say, look, if she's saying it's inextricably, at least this is a claim, right? It's inextricably tied to man's survival, not to his physical survival, but to that on which his physical survival depends. Well, that is his physical survival, to the survival of his consciousness. To me, it's like this is the, I don't quite get why, how someone says this and then they're saying it's just a pure end in itself that doesn't want to be analyzed at all.
yeah, it isn't. It does have later ends for sure. Rand is. I definitely would say she's claiming that it's an important psychological impact. There's a psychological purpose that it serves the needs of your life, and your life is the thing that has no is an end in itself. There's no other reason to live other than you don't say the purpose of living is to do X. Like, no, and there's no other purpose to living than living. The purpose of consuming art is a function for your consciousness.
Okay. Well,
I mean, that's the
what?
most sensible way to phrase it. And it does sound like a contradiction when she's saying there is no purpose other than contemplation, and then saying it serves a need of man's consciousness. I think that's a contradiction, and I don't know how to charitably interpret that.
What
Other
about, yeah, yeah, go on, sorry.
other than her phrasing's wrong, I know she means to say that it doesn't serve any other physical purpose. It's merely psychological. It doesn't serve a material end specifically,
Yeah,
as in
maybe.
it doesn't, like, it's not used in order to, I don't know, give you nutrients, obviously. So
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's, yeah, if we're going to charitably interpret, she just means it does have an end and it is a need, and it's a need of consciousness, which does, so it does affect survival as well. I mean, if you think they're connected, then you are saying, yes, it also is essential to his man's survival. But then it's almost in the same category as like going to a therapist. Like, well, I could substitute in therapy for this by this same, I could be like, therapy is for the contemplation and uh, it serves the need of consciousness. It's not utilitarian, but it's tied to his survival, but to the preservation and survival of his consciousness so that he's able to think through problems and life problems well or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? I'm not really seeing yeah, I mean, it's similar to what else could there be? Therapy, anything that's like psychological in nature primarily, or self-help books. Maybe self-help books are included in this. Um,
yeah, I
yeah,
mean, it's in a way it's that their art is so high up in importance that it's almost as high as life, because there's no further end to life than life. And the end for art could be more life, right? Or experiencing life and things like that. But there isn't much else after that. After, what end does art serve besides your consciousness? Your consciousness serves the ends of your life. That's only like two steps away from life, as opposed to, say, like something like a learning how to do algebra is like many more steps away from serving the purpose of your life.
yeah. I mean, that's the claim. I
Yes.
don't see exactly why that's true yet. Like, I don't see why art is so close, so essential to like life.
Okay.
It would be interesting
Yeah.
to starve myself of art for 1 year and document
Yes.
and see if this is true. Because like at least from introspection, I can't be like, oh yeah, I definitely need art, otherwise my consciousness will die. Like that seems a bit too abstract and not
Right.
connected to anything.
Yeah, it'd be more an aspect of flourishing than it is survival per se. But it'd be interesting to look at to what extent is your flourishing hindered by not consuming art. Obviously, you won't die, but if you don't consume art for a year, but will you be doing as well as you could have been?
Right. Yeah,
And there's no really way to compare. Even if you did it for a year and you did well, how do you know you wouldn't have done better with it? Like,
yeah.
there's no,
Yeah, yeah. It's a good question. Like with when there's a lot of things like that where I don't know, if I hadn't read certain books, how what I'd be doing. I just don't know, and I don't know how much better I am for having read those books. Like it's hard to pinpoint
yeah,
exactly what the difference is.
yeah.
Um, yeah, this term, like it's I don't. This is like there's a lot of complexity here in the psycho-epistemology. This is like more psychology, right? This is not even philosophy anymore. She's like,
Yeah.
yet this is the simpler part of his psycho-epistemological task. I don't even know what a psycho-epistemological task is. Sounds
I
like
never really
it's
liked that word, but I'll give you a different definition. an easy definition. The study of mental operations that characterizes a man's method of dealing with reality. So it's really just a combination of the psychological operation, like the psychological science pertaining to just ways of thinking. So it's just, I think of more like the connection between your own thinking versus your epistemology. It seems like it's just a fancy term that doesn't mean anything helpful. I mean, I would just call it psychological task. I don't see the point of adding psycho-epistemological.
Me
I mean,
neither.
any psychological characteristic or thing is probably going to be epistemological, or any cognitive task will be psycho-epistemological, because you got to identify and you got to have the psychology, your mental states and all that. So I think that's implied in cognitive, that it's epistemological.
Yeah, maybe also, I guess it's the non-volitional aspects is included. And then on top of that, the volitional, but not immediately volitional. I don't know if those distinctions, I just made them up, but like, we're talking about habit before, like thought patterns you've habituated that support your current conscious thinking. And then also like things like the cognitive biases you mentioned. Maybe it's all of that. I don't know.
If anything, maybe it's more like in the context of like therapy, like, oh, why do you feel so angry about the world? Well, that could be your psychoepistemology, or your
What?
epistemology, your way of thinking about what's true or false,
What do you mean?
affects your psychology on life, like your attitude towards existence.
But is it that's from what I understood so far, your attitude toward existence is covered in the next essay which I read, which is sense of life, which is
Yes.
separate from psychoepistemology. It's like a separately defined concept.
To me, it's like the difference between cognitive and faculty of reason. Like, they're so similar to me that I can't really give you a particular difference between the two,
Yeah. Okay.
other than just different connotations. Like, one you use more often when talking about art and emotions. The other is more analytical when you're talking about like therapy or issue problems in your personal life and whatnot. But they seem to refer to the same thing. Like, your sense of life is particular to you, but psychoepistemology, I guess, would be like the study of sense of life in a way. But I don't use the term really. I don't bother with the term myself. I just talk about cognitive or emotional or things like that. I
Got
don't
it.
bother with the term. I think it only makes things more confusing.
Yeah. I mean, the ideal would just be like I like to just say rather than this person. I never. Well, I'm just gonna say I don't get it, and I'm leaving it for now. So, yeah. Um,
We'll do one more question.
yeah, sounds good.
Is it an evaluation
But
abstraction?
maybe we can find something that's not like gonna take an ages, or let's just do this. I don't know.
I'll just go to this one.
Yeah. So what is this about these two separate abstractions? What evaluating man needs? So you need two chains of concepts. So there's one and that she like separates them. Why? I didn't get this. What is this? Uh, so like why is there this thing called like normative abstractions? Don't you just have abstractions and then you evaluate them? I don't get that.
It's something like you could identify things in a simple way, like just identify the goal, or choosing actions and choosing or identifying facts, evaluating facts as they are. And that could be just more surface level, like, I don't know, like more basic, like, I'm not sure, I can't think of an example right now, but
That's
and then
okay.
normative being like,
We can come to it
once you
later.
know the odds about the situation, like you need to is not the same sort of abstractions that just talk about what your goals are. You could have sets of abstractions referring to a normative judgment as good or bad, a certain moral quality or a rightness or wrongness of certain judgments. I mean, identifying a goal does not itself tell you is it good or bad. You need a different sort of abstraction to tell you is it good or bad? Is this goal bad? Is this method of dealing with reality a bad one? You could identify them a particular goal or an action, but that doesn't say whether it's good or bad. You just need more abstraction to do that.
Yeah, that's what I didn't get though, because I just thought that you have abstractions and then you make evaluations, but there's no like pre-evaluated thing in your mind. So I didn't. That's what I didn't understand.
It's hard to say, does it need to be a separate chain of concepts, or are they really connected, or are they from the same chain, except one's just more abstract, more complex? It would seem like it's just saying that your judgments of normative, of good or bad, is first dependent on acknowledging or recognizing facts of reality, or acknowledging a goal, or acknowledging an action. But once you do that, then you can make the normative abstraction, make use of a normative abstraction after you've identified these facts. Is you can't just start with what you ought to do, and that's that. Like, you have a set of facts, like the facts of reality, and then dependent on that or the normative abstraction is like, is it good or is it bad? You can't just judge good or bad in a vacuum. It depends on having identified specific goals and actions.
Okay, maybe I'm still not clear on it, but we can. I'm sort of seeing maybe it's a standard. So the abstraction
Right.
is a measuring stick. Because I was saying like, well, you can't have pre-evaluations, maybe, but if you evaluate, you have to evaluate in relation to something, right? So I don't know,
Yes.
maybe it's a standard. I'm not sure, but
Yeah, or at least it's a
we
rational
can.
standard, because you're trying to begin with a basis of facts, and then from that basis, you can make normative abstractions of good or bad, right or wrong.
Hmm.